First of all, I want to say thank you for coming out and joining us this afternoon. My name is Kyle Rudy-Full, the Executive Director here at Allgood Play Center, here to do the welcome and a little bit of talking about why we're gathered here today. Before getting started with the talk about the programs, introduction of the artists, and getting the presentation itself rolling, I just wanted to take a moment to pause and respectfully acknowledge that Allgood Play Center is located on the traditional land of the Dakota people and to honor the Anishinaabe people of this land. So this event here is the launch of our first exhibition of 2024, and this is one of my most favorite every single year, getting to celebrate the work and makers that have been with us in the course of the last year in the residency programs, and to see what voices are new and upcoming within the field of clay through the Minneapolis hub that we are located within. We do have a number of people that are connected in via Zoom. With this being a great place for people to come to, they also matriculate on two different institutions for residencies, graduate school, you name it. So people come in and then they go back out. Sometimes they stick with us for a long time, which is absolutely amazing. But for those that are connected via Zoom, actually up there I should be looking, please keep your microphones muted and cameras off during the presentations, just to get the best possible live stream that we can. We're going to be editing this video down and getting it posted onto the website once we have some time to, cut the intro and that type of stuff out. But we will be doing questions at the very end. So for those that are on Zoom, can type those into the chat feature, or if you're here with us in person, just jot those down. And once all of the presentations have been completed, we'll go through that Q&A right at the very end before we go into the exhibition, just so we don't end up cutting somebody off mid presentation at the end. This afternoon, we got a schedule of presenters who will share insights on their award years, their history and backgrounds as makers, and their process that led up to what work they have installed in the exhibition. Like I said, with our goal being able to give everyone as much time as possible speaking, we're going to do Q&A at the very end. We'll see how much time we have left, give a little bit of downtime, and then we'll be migrating everybody into the exhibition space for the open that we have taking place from 6 to 8 this evening. For those that are on Zoom and not able to be with us in person or visit Minneapolis to see the exhibition in person, they'll be loaded onto a 3D virtual tour that you can walk through. Or if anybody here has friends far away that would like to maybe see the show, in about a week and a half or 2 weeks time, that'll be fully edited and available for people to click through and see in a virtual format if they're not able to be with us in person. All of us here at the center are incredibly grateful to be fortunate enough to host opportunities like this for emerging artists in the field, with the generosity and support of those who believe in the mission to advance the ceramic arts through education, exhibitions, and artist services for artists, learners, and the community. Having seen the incredible impact these awards have had on the lives and careers of grant program alumni, we look forward to our continued work to support the future recipients and ongoing development of the field alongside those that make all this possible. Collectively, and Smith Sharp Fireplace Supply supported one artist through the Fogelberg Studio Fellowship Program. This residency opportunity is one for emerging ceramic artists from Minnesota and or Wisconsin, whose work is strictly functional and who have specific intent in the pursuit of a career in studio pottery. This program was previously supported through Soup It Up, Inc., an organization committed to supporting the future of the Minneapolis community. During the 2023 residency year, Katie Reeves was the recipient of the NCC Fogelberg Studio Fellowship. We will also be hearing from our Anonymous Artist Studio Fellows, Johannah, Cairns, and Lofton. This Studio Fellowship is awarded to emerging ceramic artists working in functional, sculptural, relational, installation, you name it. If it's clay-based or predominantly clay, they're eligible to apply for it. This fellowship is made possible through generous contributions from several anonymous donors, as well as proceeds from the Recollect program, which is one in which people can make donations of pieces to NCC. When those eventually get sold, that is a restricted set of dollars that go into the continuation of that particular program. Also, Ron Lindy and Rob Ostrander make a generous annual gift to an individual who's pursuing a career in pottery or actively researching historic pottery methods. They do this as ambassadors on behalf of the Red Wing Collector Society Foundation. In conjunction with the funds they provide on behalf of the foundation, Their contribution supported the practice of Clarice Allgood as 2023's recipient of the Pottery Museum of Red Wing Award. Let's see here. This was the end of the beginning of 2022. NCC announced the launch of the BIPOC Studio Fellowship Program, and we are proud to have Evelyn Mtika with us tonight virtually as the inaugural recipient. Supported internally by the organization, this program provides one artist, again, working in any capacity with clay, the working studio space, professional development opportunities, and additional support in order to make the program as impactful as possible for that particular recipient. Thank you all for being here for the presentations part. Like I said, we're probably going to have a few more trickling in as we keep going. But we're going to be starting off this afternoon with our two remote presenters. We're going to take about 5, maybe 10 minutes of intermission to do a little reset on technology, and then switch over with the 3 in-person presenters to finish this out before we head over into the exhibition space. So starting us off today, giving me just a minute to fumble with computers, we're going to be hearing from Johannah Cairns first.
Hello everyone, my name is Johannah Cairns and I was one of the 2022 to 2023 Anonymous Artist Studio Fellowship recipients. So I was actually born just a few hours south of Minneapolis in a small town called Fort Dodge, Iowa. Since then I have lived in Humboldt, Iowa, Charles City, Iowa, St. Louis, Missouri, Blue Springs, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, New Bedford, Massachusetts, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm currently residing in Athens, Ohio, pursuing a master's degree in ceramics. I only mention all of this because a lot of my work explores relationship I have with the concept of home and how relocation has affected that relationship. In 2020, I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Visual Art with an emphasis in ceramics from the University of Kansas. My final semester was cut short, obviously because of the COVID lockdown, which meant that I no longer had a studio to work in. But prior to the lockdown, I had made 3 small heads that I intended to sell later at the club sale that we have each semester. So using those and whatever I could find around my house, which was old clothing and a 1990s Singer sewing machine, I made these. So these pieces, titled Beanie Babies, was my first exploration into mixed media and doll making. I look back at them now and see the start of a body of work that I ultimately concluded with my work at the Northern Clay Center. Despite making these out of necessity due to the circumstances we were all under at the time, it started to make me think about both physical comfort and emotional comfort. At this point, I was having a really difficult time convincing myself to leave my house, even for something as simple as going to the grocery store. And while I do think this fear that I had was exacerbated by the pandemic, I think it had roots that were ultimately deeper than just a fear of the virus. So that's made me start to look into my relationship that I had with my home and how I could represent that relationship in my art. So home for me was a place that was comfortable and safe, but also acted as a hindrance in making connections with others. I used to hide from others, so while it was the place I felt most, at ease, it also was suffocating. To incorporate this into my work, I started thrifting fabrics that related to the home, things like upholstery fabric, curtains, tablecloths, old bed sheets, blankets, etc., etc. And I wanted to use the same idea that I used in the Beanie Babies of making these bodysuits that would cover the majority of the body and part of the head as a way to act as both a physical barrier and protective cover, as well as like a buffer between other people and myself. And I wanted to also reference the traditional doll form still with the ceramic head, hands and feet, and fiber bodies. I didn't actually get to start working on this idea until I moved to Massachusetts to start my postbac at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. When I went, I wanted to really focus on learning how to make patterns for sewing. The original concept that I had with the Beanie Babies, I just adapted a pattern for a beanbag that I found online. But in regards to making patterns from scratch, I had absolutely no experience. So I decided to make the body forms out of paper and tape, and then mark them up with a Sharpie where I wanted the pattern to go, and then very meticulously measured all of those lines to note down all of the measurements so that I could make a paper pattern, which I would eventually turn into an initial mock-up, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. After I made the initial mock-up, I would tweak it if it needed fixed, and then eventually made the final form, like the comfort dolls you can see on the right. And you can actually see the torsos of those dolls on the right are longer than the ones in the mock-up on the left, just because I didn't think that a torso could fit. So making those mock-ups was really important instead of just diving headfirst into making the final form. So I used this method for all of the dolls that I made early on in my post-bac program, but the end goal was being comfortable enough with designing patterns to eventually take out the initial paper model so that I could work in larger forms, because I do not have enough paper or tape to make life-size paper forms. It just wasn't in the docket. So in the later part of my post-bac, I wanted to start focusing more on specific relationships. I think the initial few pieces that I made felt too general, so I wanted to start pulling from my own experiences. This piece, titled Formal Acquaintance, was one of the first attempts at this. It's talking about physical relationships that lack emotional intimacy. And this was actually the last piece that I made during my time at my post-bac program, which then leads me to the Northern Clay Center with the Anonymous Artist Studio Fellowship. So one thing in particular that I really wanted to work on during my residency was building armature. You can see in the left two pictures kind of where I started with building armature, and they were not at all stable. I actually had to shove a bunch of tinfoil down into the feet of the 8-foot tall guy in the middle, just so that he wouldn't fall over. And also, I wanted to make armatures with stuff that I could use in my home. At the university, it was really nice because I had a fully equipped wood shop that I could work with, but that wasn't going to be feasible working from home. Or, the Northern Clay Center did have some tools, but it wasn't as in-depth as I had been used to. So I decided to start using chicken wire and fiber mache, which is the same thing as paper mache, instead using fiber. In my case, I just ripped a bunch of bed sheets into long strips and made this hard outer shell, and that was hopefully going to fix the problem with the wobble. I've gotten better at it even since my time at the residency, but one thing I was also able to achieve by using this method of armature making was more dynamic poses, and also I was able to start adding arms, which is not something I even attempted in my post-bac. Too much going on in there. Being in a residency over being in a university program really allowed me to focus on the more time-consuming elements that I wanted to include in my work, the most important being quilting. I think quilts in and of themselves are homey. They feel like home. So to use the fabrics that I had been using prior to starting quilting, the ones from curtains or tablecloths or bed sheets, whatever, and adding quilting to them just added an extra layer of comfort and plushness that I didn't think I was achieving as much with just the techniques I had been using in the past. So combining both armature making and quilting allowed me to continue making work based off of my specific relationships in my life, while also making them more dynamic and expressive, which you can see here in Closer to You, as well as in A Moment Alone, Always with You, or in Knots. During my time at the Northern Clay Center, I also had the opportunity to teach at several amazing programs. I taught sculpture, painting, printmaking, and drawing at an independently owned studio for children age 7 through 17 called Studio 7. I worked as a tutor and tutor coordinator at different public schools in the Minneapolis Public School District through Axiom Learning, which is actually where I made this little piece. I just drew a new picture on the whiteboard every day that I was there, and by the time I ended, I had lots of drawings, and all the kids loved it. And then I got to end my time in Minneapolis teaching summer clay camps at the Northern Clay Center. And I never knew how much joy teaching would bring me, and as this was really my first experience doing it, but it's definitely something that I think I want to keep in my practice for the remainder of time. So luckily for me, I got into a master's program that allows me to continue teaching at Ohio University. And while a lot of the formal elements of my current body of work are similar to the work I was making at the Northern Clay Center, you know, using dolls, using similar armature structures, and I'm not able to quilt because unfortunately it is more time consuming than I have time for. But I'm really shifting my focus to how people, places, and objects relate to memory, and what happens to memory when those places or people or objects are no longer accessible. So I've started to use dollhouses within the pieces themselves to portray memory. This piece in particular is talking about how the people that you grew up with act as depositories of memory, and how memory is stronger when it's shared between two or more people. Okay. This piece is talking about a performance of self when all physical reminders of who you were in the past are gone. So this one's pretty different from the work that I've made in the past. It's not really a doll, it's a wall sculpture, but it's still using fabric in a similar way. It's this kind of barrier to prevent people from seeing what's really going on the inside, which you can see is an empty attic. There's some signs that there was someone there at one point, and it's just no longer there. And these images are a detail of one of my most recent work that talk about fragments that remain of memory. There are pieces of evidence that point to what that person was like or their interests, despite not being present in the space any longer. If you're wondering, those are ladybugs. I actually have an infestation of ladybugs in my house, so I got them for free. And then this piece is really just an exploration of form and determining what parts of my works can be transformed or deleted without losing meaning. And I really don't see myself pursuing this any further, but it was a really good tool to help me clarify what I want to continue to my work to be in the future. So thank you all.
So my name is Evelyn Mtika. This is my journey with portraiture and form, and embracing texture specifically. So just a background on me, I was raised in West Philadelphia, was born in Alaska, but I was raised in West Philadelphia. And because of that, I was actually introduced to clay when I was in, I want to say like 4th grade, from another studio called Clay Studio Philadelphia. And that kind of stayed with me for as long as I know. And so I got my BFA in ceramics from University of Hartford in Connecticut in 2022. I was the BIPOC Studio Fellow at Northern Clay Center from 2022 until last September. So October 2022 until September 2023. And now I'm currently a resident artist at Clay Art Center in Port Chester, New York. And it's been a great time. And I want to show how I got started. These are kind of my haphazardly made slab cups. These are the first pieces that ever got into a show. These are the first pieces that I kind of started to explore any conceptual subject on clay. I actually started my going into school as a painter. And then I think my junior year of school, I kind of started to switch gears and saw how much ceramic had to offer. I was really intimidated by ceramics in general, of course, because there's so much you can do with the medium. But I was able to show people that I loved, my brothers. These are notes to my brothers. And also I was able to kind of give it some conceptual matter that I really was tied to. And so these are the first pieces that I was able to put into a show, actually at Clay Art Center, where I'm at my residency now. And I kind of continued into making some larger pieces. This is called Homesickness Mama, and it is a Allgood piece. And I really wanted to show basically the African-American, African diaspora through my background, my heritage. And here's an up-close picture of this. I actually took notes, or I had my mom send me voice notes about her first experience realizing that she was going to have me. So it does say I cried and thought my life was over. And my mom told me, she told me to make sure to emphasize that this is because she was a teenage mom. So she really thought her life was going to be over. And then she realized like how much of a gift I was. And having this as one of my first really big projects kind of revolutionized the way that I started to make my work, because I was like, wow, I can really give this like these pieces life and background and story. So my notes to my brothers and then this piece, Homesickness Mama, are really like the foundation of all of my ceramic work. This is the last piece I made when I was in University of Hartford for my thesis project called Holding You Feels Like a Poem. I really started to kind of go past the form that I was going with and start to do sculptural work. So at this point, I'm like trying to get over my intimidation of ceramics, and I am really focusing on hair as well. So that started to become a big part of like what I was doing. Really just focusing on connection and bridging this kind of gap that I was feeling culturally, but also trying to exhibit the solidarity that I found in other Black people, but also people of color, and just kind of showing that strength. Then after that, oh, here's a detail shot. And then after that, I was able to, I like literally have an Excel spreadsheet. I literally was applying to all these residencies. This is when I realized I was like, okay, this is something I really want to do for the rest of my life. So I started to apply to residency after residency after residency. I did not know how it was going to happen, but I was able to get an interview with Northern Clay Center with Kyle himself. And this was first of all, 20 hours away from home. Philly to Minneapolis is 20 hours away, but I was so determined. I was like, this is something I need to do. So I drove out 20 hours. I packed all my stuff up, drove out 20 hours, and I got a place. I got a job. Like literally, I walked into a Continental Clay, which people might know if you're in the area. Walked into Continental Clay, asked for a job. They said, come back next week. We might have one for you. And I was able to secure this residency basically. And I basically had a 9 to 5. And then from 5 to 10 in the afternoon, I would be at the studio. I did hit burnout, but I was still able to make my work. Actually, the first thing that I was able to experience upon entering Northern Clay Center was this wonderful show, A Gathering, works from contemporary Black American ceramic artists. And at the right, we have Adair Willard. She's a really big inspiration to me. And also Chusani Elaine Dean, who's actually an alum from University of Hartford. This was really empowering for me. It was already nerve-wracking walking into a space where there's not a lot of people of color, or you don't see it, rather. There's not a lot of spaces made for us. So walking into Northern Clay Center and seeing a show dedicated to Black American ceramic artists was important to me, and it really gave me good footing for the rest of the year. Something that I wanted to go into Northern Clay Center with was the thought of sculpture and moving past this smooth, refined features, kind of like this pure stone and just this smoothness. I wanted to really start exploring the skin and making sure that texture was apparent in the skin and that you could really feel the piece when you're looking at it. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but I definitely wanted to depart from the more Eurocentric thinking of sculptures. This is the first piece I made with Minnesota Clay's Iron Range. It's wonderful. It's really beautiful at a cone 6 temperature. And I was just focusing on bringing some details into this. It is not in the show if you're there in person, but I just did want to show this as my first piece at Northern Clay Center. Here's some detail shots. I'm really just trying to focus on showing all of these details, but still having like the face, like the serenity of the face peek through it. And this is just like another detail shot of how I really was trying to touch the clay. Like there's something really beautiful about working with this clay and being able to move the face and make the features and kind of give it that roughness around like all the eyelids and the eyelashes and moving the nostrils. These moments are really important to me. The faces always come easy to me. I've been doing portraits for as long as I remember. As soon as I picked up a pencil, like faces were the first thing that came to mind to make. But working with clay is an entirely different feeling. So you really get to add a dimension, and like some of the pits that I felt in my face, I wanted to add to the pieces that I was working with. Here's I Will Keep Watch for You. You can see this in the gallery. And when I was making this, of course, faces in portraiture and that smoothness or rather the texture, subverting smoothness was important. But I also realized how important the hair and like the connection of the hair was in the pieces that I was making, how it really connected to the diasporic quality of my work. So after this piece, after I made this specific piece, I realized that the hair was going to be an integral part of all the works after. In this, I really wanted to show solidarity. I really thought about like when somebody's sleeping and there's nobody else to watch for you, you can always trust, like kind of like sisterhood. You can always trust your friend to have your back, your sister to have your back, or whoever's close to you. Here's the next piece. No One Knows the Heavy Load I Carry. I'm really exploring at this point hair and like the details of the hair and kind of stretching up that hair to symbolize thoughts. So the patterns don't really connotate any of text or any kind of language or anything, but more so the thoughts and the imagery of like, what would thoughts look like if they came off of a page or came out of your head and put onto a page. At this point, the last piece that I just showed, I Will Keep Watch for You, and No One Knows the Heavy Load I Carry. These are hollow forms. So I'm not working into pots yet. I'm really just working on hollow forms and trying to get some organic nature in there. And I'm still finding myself really captivated by how you can make like these like rough and smooth patches on a face. And you can see here, I use like a slab, like a pinch slab technique to combine all of these. And I don't want to give like any bad guidance for anybody who's new to clay, but like I did not like really slip and score any of these. I really just kind of pressed them and smoothed it out on the inside and hope for the best, which is pretty dangerous. But that first piece I was making, everything was kind of heavy. And then I really realized that I needed to get my work to be a little bit lighter so I can travel with them. This is my favorite piece of the bunch. It's called Brightest Before Morning, and it really is just talking about the eyes, just like how bright those eyes are in comparison to the rest of the piece. I really loved how this hair would stretch into the color, and just, there's something so nice in like the weight of holding it. Not that you guys can hold it in the gallery, but the weight of holding it is really nice. It has like this, it's like equilibrium. And I just thought this was such a strong piece. The face is looking so forward and unapologetically. So this is really important for me as well. And then another piece that I have is Revolution. And I was thinking more so about the Haitian Revolution and how the French kind of collapsed. So I was like taking like a connotation of French artwork, French pottery, and putting that on a really strong base with these three faces surrounded at the bottom. And this was the last, I think, of my set that I had. And I thought it ended pretty strongly. So, but after this, I kind of lost a little bit of some inspiration because I was a little bit like, okay, I think I've made my set of pieces. And these are my pieces at Mtika. This is just me presenting. It was really crazy for me. This is my first time going to Mtika. After that, I think this was around, I want to say April. I noticed my studio mates. So there's Jen and Ivy who are in the next studio to me. And then I think Katie, who's across. They were making sprig molds. Actually, before I came here, I did not know what sprig molds were. And I really wanted to explore with those. So I made like a bunch of small little faces. And I made like these really badly made plaster molds. Like you can see like how cracked they are. I got better at it over time, but So on the left, I have sprig molds that I made there. And then on the right, I actually didn't use these molds until Clay Art Center, so I'll show that later. But I did want to show some of this exploration of color and glaze and just kind of me bringing life to some of these faces here. And then I think after this, after I fired this, it was really time for me to like start doing my research, looking into new residencies. And I really was just kind of like, I was scrambling. I was like, what's next? What's next after Northern Clay Center? It's Clay Art Center. And I, again, packed all my stuff up and I got ready to move. This one, I think, I literally jumped back to back. So I actually ended my residency at Northern Clay Center 2 weeks early, which thanks, Kyle, but I ended it 2 weeks early. And I started my residency at Clay Art Center 2 weeks late. And Clay Art Center, I did not know what to expect. I was super nervous. Fortunately, at Northern Clay Center, I was able to do everything without like a roster. It's my first time being outside of school. I don't have any schedules. I literally have my own schedule that I make for myself. And it was really freeing. But then when I'm looking at like this residency at Clay Art Center, I don't know what to expect. It looks like it's super teaching forward, and I don't know how much time I'm going to be able to make work. So I was really nervous. And also I hadn't been throwing. So, which if you know, as a potter, like throwing is pretty integral for a lot of places. When you're trying to teach, most places want you to teach throwing. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I pack my stuff up and I'm like a little nervous. I get here, they throw me into my classes. But all that aside, I still have some ideas. So here are some of the ideas that I kind of started putting together, like Protest and The Wiz, which is the Black version of The Wizard of Oz. But I have only really seen The Wiz. And I really started wanting to make some more figurative things. So I do have a show coming up in June. And this is a piece that I'm working on currently. And we're going to see how far I can get into like this figure making process. But I found that I was really enjoying the work that I was making, all the figure exploration that I had going on. And even though it was really teaching forward my time at Clay Art Center, I was still enjoying it. Here are some of the sprig molds from earlier, the small little faces that I started to attach to all of my pieces that I was making in my classes as demos and stuff like that. And I also was getting really attached to doing some teacher work. So on the left here, we have Clay Center is the best with both Evelyns. This is by a 8-year-old named Jaden. And the reason he says both Evelyns, although spelled incorrectly, is because I had an assistant who's also named Evelyn, which is pretty odd. We don't have a lot of Evelyns around where I'm from. And then on the right, we have a small little frog made for me by a student. So although I haven't had nearly as much time at Northern Clay Center to make artwork, I actually really love teaching. And I think that all my next movements, whether it's through residencies or MFA programs, is actually going to be through teaching. And I really found that I'm just so connected to all the students and all the connections I've been making here have been wonderful. And I have just been so fortunate to have such a supportive or support group like Kyle and Tiffy and all the people I've met at Northern Clay Center. And that's just kind of continued at Clay Art Center. Yeah. So that's just been my time as a resident artist, both at Northern Clay Center and Clay Art Center. And you can reach me. Well, I'm horrible at emails, but you can definitely reach me at Insta at evelynmtika.art.
I'm Clarice Allgood, the Red Wing Pottery Museum awardee, and this is my slideshow. This is a very old pot, and I just said that I hope when the memory of our civilization has passed, that someone may come upon my pot and find it as attractive and useful as someone might today. Today, I'm going to talk about early influences and directions, how I arrived in Minnesota at Northern Clay Center, and wrap up talking about where this past award year has taken me in the studio. And there's first Mom. I love this photo. She looks happy, a formidable force of resourcefulness. In this frame, in the houses I grew up in, everything was found, made, or transformed from what it was to what was needed with skilled attention. Even the bricks haven't escaped notice. I learned to sew before I learned how to write. In looking over a body of work that spans decades and mediums, patterns of choice and subjects of acute interest emerge, and a certain obstinance. This self-portrait in pencil was drawn sometime after I had decided not to go to art school. And that's me in the way back. Instead, I would roam about, work some very odd jobs, cartoon a lot, and study philosophy off and on. Looking on this illustration now, I see someone listening to the objects around her, in this case, a kitschy pincushion, paying attention to how they reflect a sense of self and context. There's been a sustained interest in what lies underfoot in the unseen, both conceptually and perceptually, a prevailing preoccupation with the quality of our sensory environment and a sense of personal responsibility in contributing to it. And this guides what I do and how I think about what I do. A double thread holding it all together. These values found a place in philosophy, straddling the fields of phenomenology and environmental aesthetics. In practice, these values inspired works of a sort of multisensory graffiti, like hanging wind chimes near bus stops. In 2012, I was immersed in a rescue, recover, and release project, reupholstering abandoned shopping carts, which I would then photograph as if I'd found them that way, having gone feral. I became quite fond of these carts. They're so odious. These vehicles of extraordinary change, shaping our planet, how we interact with each other, accumulate a sense of self. By individualizing and caring for them, it lent them a sort of autonomy that I hadn't expected, but welcomed. And then I would release them. This project altered in small moments the texture of the everyday for someone unknown by someone unknown. Well, in 2013, I joined an open studio in Atlanta, attending a handful of weekend workshops. In early 2016, a friend talked me into attending a demo given by Linda Christensen. I had no idea who she was, but my friend said the food was going to be really good. In my sketchbook, I scribbled something that would have a profound effect on my life. On being an artist, she said, your job is to move away from people not interested with your work. The corollary of Linda's words, that it's my job as an artist to move towards work that moves me, prompted the search to find such work. And maybe it was also the yes bubble. Later that summer in 2016, I would meet Mark Shapiro and Sam Taylor at Penland. These two would have a profound influence on how I make, think, and live with pots. In 2017, after an informal residency at Mark's, I came along to help them during the St. Croix Valley Pottery Tour. It was a really insane introduction to Minnesota. If anyone's been, of course. Inspired in 2018, I moved north for the pots, for the people who love these pots, the weather, and also to join the Minnesota NICE program at Northern Clay Center. I am so very grateful for that year, for Ursula Hargens, my mentors, Linda Christensen and Steve Rolfe, my Minnesota NICE cohort, and alumni, and everyone who keeps Northern Clay Center moving along. Thank you, Kyle. On joining the program and coming from a non-traditional education in ceramics, I was self-consciously aware of a vague list of objects I thought I ought to be offering. At the time, I had my own idiosyncratic standard forms. There were the mugs and the casseroles, but also traveling cups, yarn bowls, dishes for overeating cats, and more yarn bowls. What to make weighed on my mind. The teapot especially demanded attention. I was so resentful of the form, not from really a technical standpoint, but more a lack of interest in drinking tea. And so it happened that I was walking one day, imagining all the lovely teapots I've met lined up along the sidewalk and kicking them like footballs. From there, still hearing them crash, I ruminated on the thought that I might mash the form into something I might find useful, like bookends. A unity of purpose emerged from that year. I am most drawn to make objects advocating for activities of engaged solitude and self-reliance, such as knitting, gardening, reading, and cooking. These objects inhabit the world I want to live in that would support an ideal culture of well-used objects rather than consumed ones. My modest upbringing, rich in craft and thrift, inspired a faith and handwork and available resources. And I found myself pulling more and more from my philosophical leanings as well. With the more unified purpose of form, a direction and surface treatment evolved, more or less. Early on, the mysterious twisty line where glaze met clay along the feet of certain pots, if I used certain glazes, caught and held my attention. This led to initial questions concerning glaze chemistry and a deep desire to pull this phenomena up over a pot like a pair of socks or a cozy. Looking for a more direct method than waxing that would offer more texture and line variability and quality, I began using a bulb syringe to trail familiar patterns of knitting and crocheting. With these patterns, I can easily expand and contract to fit the form, and the glaze clay body interface is omnipresent. Further reading on this deepened my appreciation of this bond. Coming from a background in environmental philosophy, there was an intense pleasure in recognizing this interface between a glaze and clay body as analogous to our relation to our surroundings. The glaze pierces the clay body. The clay body extends into the glaze. Pushing this absorption edge to the forefront guides my experimentation with materials, slips, terra sigillatas, clay bodies, and glazes. Absorption of varying bisque temperatures, as this slide illustrates, is considered as well. I really don't expect anyone to be able to read this in my work, but this absorption of interest continues to generate the problems I wish to engage, both in materials and form. During my 2020 Fogelberg residency, I settled into a combination of clay body, slip, and glaze that I loved, working into a density of pattern that in my mind, paradoxically, equalized the foreground and background of a pattern. A carefully trailed pattern is then exposed to atmospheric soda firing. In experiencing a residency during such a traumatic year of loss, uncertainty, and grief, it was important to me to develop a form both thoughtful and functional, which might provide a placeholder and tool. During the residency, I noticed I was using a banding wheel as an elevated coaster, my mug marooned atop a small atoll, resting above the shifting flotsam and jetsam of a wreck of a studio. Moreover, I wanted to push these sets further, recording in some small way the shared and personal traumas of 2020, somehow making absence as presence, honoring the space where the pattern of our lives was once, waiting to be filled via hope and imagination. The anchoring coaster would carry the pattern, offer a foundation to rest upon, to recall. But how to pull the negative space forward as a something was a puzzle. After many misdirections, I turned to latex, finding that I can trail it almost as easily as if it were a slip or glaze. And the process and effect was exactly what I was searching for. With the Red Wing Award, I sought to acknowledge the gradual freedom of movement with availability of vaccines. I sought to complement my regulating, calming patterns of black and white. I sought more color, a pattern approach less formalized, and also sound. For color and pattern, I turned to Victorian crazy quilts for inspiration. I've always loved these. There's a perceived, if not explicit, pattern. During 2023, I tried varying concentrations of oxides and mason stains and slips, looking for a particular vibrancy. A single glaze, like embroidery floss, connects the colored slips. The glaze's resultant color depends on which slip it is bonded to, and the colored slips in turn are dependent on the glaze working as a resist to the soda once introduced during a firing. So this is so odd. So the crazy quilt, which I've always loved, is actually based off of this craze in 1870s for the Celadon crackle glaze and the pavilion, the Japanese pavilion during the World Exposition or the Centennial celebration in Philadelphia. So the Celadon crackle glaze informed the crazy quilt craze that happened in the 1880s. And then, and there I am taking that inspiration as well. Back to ceramics. Okay, Another development arising from the quiet brought on by COVID-19 and wanting to engage as many senses as possible with my work have been including rattles where they might make sense or offer delight in knobs, false bottoms, or feet. A lot of my yarn bowls include warning rattles in the feet to alert the knitter that the bowl is on the move. Playing with the phrase butter bell, the butter rattle appeared in 2023, a sort of cheeky way to start the day. And then there was the functionality, given our circumstances today, of a deep cup with a false bottom, the center image, which holds a rattle. And this is for those who might be celebrating a special occasion by themselves or on a Zoom call or toasting from a responsibly social distance. So it rattles, you can shake it and rattle. As an artist, what I can offer is a coherence of values expressed in these tools, hoping these objects contribute to the comfort, beauty, and enjoyment of the material experience of everyday life. If it were still long enough, I would try to put a cozy on it for you. The transition into calling oneself a potter is a criteria entirely personal. My own waymarks involve teaching, writing, participating in some festivals like this one, the Minnesota Pottery Festival, and juried shows, enjoying the trust of gallery representation. I really love what I do, and I am very, very grateful to be awarded the Red Wing Pottery Museum grant of 2023. Thank you, Red Wing Pottery Museum, Northern Clay Center, and thank you, listener, for giving me your time.
So, hi, my name's Sean Lofton. I was the Anonymous Artist Studio Fellow along with Johannah, and we shared a studio together, fun fact. But I'm really excited to be talking to you today about my time as a resident at Northern Clay Center. I'm kind of doing the same format as Clarice. I kind of wanted to take you through the bits and pieces, the early work, the things that led me to Minnesota and Northern Clay Center. So wanted to start off with this photo. I'm originally from Jacksonville Beach, Florida, born and raised, spent the first 30 years of my, maybe not 30 years, I don't know, pretty long time there. The formative years, at least, were spent there. That is a picture of the pier I grew up with before it blew down. This is Jack's Beach. This is a big part of my childhood and my life, and I was really lucky where I grew up. With all the things sort of wrong with Florida now, I was situated in this really unique little spit of land in Jack's Beach, where on one side, a few blocks away, I had the Atlantic Ocean. And then on the other side, I had the Intercoastal Waterway, which is a really, really neat ecosystem. It's a brackish river system that's fed by the St. Johns River, one of the longest rivers that flow north to south in America. And it's brackish, it's neat. It's full of really funky stuff. And I was lucky to grow up between these two things. And reflecting on this presentation, what I wanted to talk about in the work and all these things, I came to realize how little I thought about this growing up and how much I took these things for granted. And it's funny, as I was sitting here thinking about this and trying to decide if I wanted to write something and what I should say, I found myself spending more and more time ruminating on these places. I did not come to the arts early. I was lucky. I was always sort of around the arts. My mom was a painter, amongst other things. You know, she's done all sorts of stuff, but there was always art and painting. My dad was a really avid reader and collector of comic books, so I was lucky to have sort of a general comfortability with visual language, which was really nice. But I went to school, kind of ended up in a place that looked like this initially. I know what you may be wondering, attractive, right? It wasn't. I ended up at a overland trucking company after graduating college the first time, which will remain nameless. Who knows who's watching, right? But yeah, I was in an office surrounded by fluorescent lights, a bunch of good old boys figuring out how to get one load of things from point A to point B day in and day out, and it was absolutely soul crushing. A lot of people also pointed that out to me. I appreciate that. I think maybe my parents are watching. I think they were some of those people that pointed that out, so I appreciate it, along with my then girlfriend, now wife. Also, big thanks for letting me know. But I was spending a lot of time here and just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think falling back on that visual language was really, really important. I found my way back to school where I got my BFA in ceramics at the University of North Florida. Really had no idea what I was getting into. But the thing that drew me to ceramics was that I was bad at it. I was really, really, really bad at it. I struggled terribly initially. But I had some really cool teachers that just were really encouraging, really incredible, and maybe saw some stick-to-itiveness that, or you know, they need to keep classes full. Who knows? I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and think they saw something there that made them want me to stay. And that's sort of this early work. This is what I was doing initially in Florida. It was a really, really atmospheric focused program, all wood fire, all soda. This is really what occupied a lot of my time, was thinking about these exotic clay bodies and how much iron I could put in something for these big reduction cools in our train kiln we just built. And always sort of trying to push material limits, thinking in terms of materiality and functionality, not doing a whole lot in terms of maybe a deeper concept, exploring more narrative. It was really functionally focused, very materially focused, really curious about how and where we could push the limit of these wood firings. Now, I benefited a lot from having two really materially literate professors who gave me a lot of knowledge really quickly. And I found myself really drawn to this medium because I was taking all this in, maybe at a loss in terms of a art vocabulary, but I was really, really excited and interested and plugged into these materials to see what they could bring. I was doing all this experimenting. I was playing with these atmospheres. I was really excited about all these different things that could happen, but I was also, I think, sort of doing a lot of what other people were doing at the time when they get really into those like atmospheric firings. There was a lot of that, like, you know, prayers to the kiln gods, and doing a lot more of sort of the deep dogmatics of these firings. And I found myself slowly burning out on it, looking ahead to graduation. We were doing these wood firings all the time, and I found myself pulling away from these aesthetics, and I found myself not as drawn to these communal ideas. That's kind of the fun thing. Let's put a big family of pots here together. I just found myself sort of pulling away from this notion of like the large village kiln in the community, not to be antisocial, but I think I had this romantic notion of the artist in solitude creating quietly and making these things on their own. And I found myself sort of lost in this sort of wave of atmospheric firing. I still have a deep appreciation for this aesthetic. I love it. I love to see it, but it felt a little disingenuous making these pots when I was surrounded by friends and colleagues who were so deeply passionate about it and had this unshakable belief in this aesthetic, in these materials, in these objects. So I kind of found myself pulling away when I was graduating. And also there's just the fact that when you finish school and you're really focused on firing in kilns that cost $10, $15, $20,000 to build, you're usually out of luck unless you're ready to hop right into a residency, which at the time I wasn't. I was doing what I do best, which was kind of just screwing around. You know, if I'm being totally honest, probably could have taken things a little more seriously at this point, but I did get into a really great teaching gig. I was teaching some high school classes, having a lot of fun, had a really great boss, super encouraging, still was surrounded by those faculty members that were really pushing me to keep working independently, was working at a big warehouse, so I had a lot of free access to materials. Things were good. I was getting kind of complacent, but the work was moving in a new direction that was really exciting. I was finding myself working with the same forms, but the materials were changing to sort of suit the tastes of the people I was teaching. In this case, it was high school students. They weren't as into round and brown. So I was doing a lot more hot pinks, purples. I was doing a lot of Sidge work. Oh, wait a minute. Purples doesn't catch. Oh, there it is. Hey, it's purple. Yeah, so I was doing a lot more of these purples, things like that. I was really exploring just this low fire palette, doing the complete opposite of what I had been doing before. And it felt really good. It felt really liberating. The stakes felt a lot lower. It was exciting. It was a different world in that high fire atmosphere. I was enjoying these pots a lot. I was making a lot of these. They were a lot of fun to make. It was a really fun time, and I finally felt comfortable as a ceramic artist, as a potter, to finally make the move to grad school at the urging of Bob Kirk. Big shout out to Bob Kirk. He's not here, but you all know. If he ever asks you, you can tell him I shouted him out here. I remember him telling me, word for word, if you don't go now, you're never gonna. So that was sort of the rallying cry for grad school. I wish it was more scholastic or more romantic, but that's what it was. If you don't go now, you're never gonna. And it was a good point. I had a lot of things. I was really comfortable in my hometown, and I wanted to see where else ceramics could take me. And that's where it did, to the state of Missouri. I ended up going to the University of Missouri in 2019. A little foreshadowing, not a great year to go to grad school, but you know, I didn't know. But that's where I went for my MFA. I went to work with Joe Pence. It was really great. I was really excited. I applied all over the country. I was trying to figure out where to go, and I lucked out with my program. A lot of things weren't as cutting edge as some places, but I was surrounded by some really, really passionate faculty that were excited to see me grow and push the limits of what I was doing materially and intellectually. And I think that's maybe the underlying theme of this entire talk where I am now, is just how lucky I've been to be surrounded by all these really phenomenal people that kind of kept pushing me to keep doing more, making better things. And I'm not gonna lie to you, when I first got there, the work was a little weird. I've always had an interest in architecture and structural elements to things. You saw it in those square pots. You can kind of see it here, kind of embracing some building materials, reversing ideas. You know, the counterbalance from this piece of concrete is the interior of a thrown object, so that way the actual wheel work isn't acting in the normal clay functional sense. It was this sort of reproduction to create a counterbalance. I was working with this weird brick clay that came from a brickyard a few towns over, where they make a bunch of fire clay, Hawthorne. If anyone is in the know, it's actually in Missouri. It's not that interesting, but you know, they also make this really vibrant brick clay. And much like Johannah mentioned, everything shut down in 2019. I lost my studio. I lost access to everything. What turned into a 2-day, close everything up so we can take the lay of the land, turned into 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into 2 months. 2 months turned into indefinitely. So I was sitting around my apartment a lot, thinking a lot, spiraling some, getting excited other times, maybe being a little manic, you know, just being weird in Missouri, stuck in an apartment, when I should be in grad school in a studio making grad work. I was getting pretty interested in doing anything, and that led me to watching a lot of movies. I ended up spending a bunch of time watching some science fiction. Went back to one of my favorites, which is Blade Runner, Ridley Scott, the original, not the new one. I have never actually seen the new one. Oops, I should probably get on that, but I haven't, and I probably won't. But this is all based on the old one. And there's this really phenomenal moment. It's very fleeting, very short, inside the house of the main character, Deckard. And I was like, whoa, that's weird looking. What's that all about? And turns out it's a house in Los Angeles. The Innes house was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Very funny. That it's only there for a minute. So I started looking into it. I don't want to get into the whole thing. This long story short becomes what my whole thesis project is about. And because I had nothing but time on my hands and some disposable income from the great state of Missouri and the University of Missouri in way of my stipend, I started buying CAD software and a new laptop and 3D printers. And then it turned into sort of a fixation, like I think it did for a lot of people, except that I literally had nothing else to do. And I started making each individual tile from this house and reproducing that. And then eventually, amazingly, the world sort of opened back up. We were able to get back into studios, and I had just this ungodly amount of plastic junk, these little tiles that I had made trying to understand this. And I was so drawn to these things. So I made plaster molds. I started using them as press molds. They later turned into slip casting molds. But I was really pushing the structural aspect of these things. I was really interested in ideas of suspension, tension, material frailty, material strength, all these things that were tied to that house. I was just sort of exploring these things, sometimes well, sometimes clumsily, the way you do in grad school. It's sort of just kind of, looking for a light switch in the dark. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you hit your foot on the bedpost. It's just, sometimes it's nice, sometimes it hurts. That's what I was doing a lot of. And this stuck for some reason. It really did. And then as I was going, I made this piece, this fountain. And it's a working fountain. It's about 3.5 feet tall. And up to this point in my program, I had this thing happen to me that I hope happens to, not hope, I hope this doesn't happen to any other ceramic artists when they're in grad school, but it seems to be where the painting and photography and, new media and video artists are kind of like, wow, it's clay. Why do I care about a bowl? That was the question I got a lot. And, you can give people all the answers in the world. Mankind's first design material, this or that, and history of sanitation. Do you want history, anthropology? What's going to move you? And none of it ever seemed to. And then I made this fountain that was all based on entropy, tied to this house. It was this object that would slowly kill itself. It would suffocate itself through its own sort of creation. It was the first time I think I got some attention in an art sense from these professors who were not at all interested in ceramics. And I started getting studio visits from people I had never met before. And I kind of started to feel this real sort of like mental energy, this sort of like frantic creativity start to build from this. And I was really fortunate to have a printmaking professor who I hope isn't on here, might be certifiably insane. I don't know. Great guy. I love him to death, always will. But he would throw some ideas at me, and I was just like trying to keep up, and it was phenomenal. And it was started having this really profound effect, which led to my thesis project, Never Again Must the Real Be Produced. It was sort of a nod to simulation, because that's sort of what school in the pandemic felt like. It felt like almost grad school, almost these things. It was the simulated pseudo reality, close to what was supposed to be, but didn't quite manifest. And that's sort of what drove all of this, was these ideas of the convergence of architecture and film and how those things could combine through a shared material, which in this case is a brick clay that had been cast in those same molds that had made those sculptures earlier. And I started having a really good time experimenting with this stuff. I did this floor installation mainly because the house that this is all built on is falling apart. I don't know how familiar everybody is with Frank Lloyd Wright. He's a really famous architect who made terrible houses. They are, there it is. If you know, you know. No, I'm joking. I kid sort of. But this house was designed in a way that it was constantly trying to destroy itself in the most beautiful way possible. The only part of it that was decorative always wanted to fall away. These tiles were always falling off the facade of this building, rolling down hills, hitting other people's houses, which I find really funny, that this, classical piece of monolithic architecture was destroying these glass postmodern things. And it feels like modernism's revenge or something. I always thought that was sort of silly. But yeah, I was getting really excited in the way these things could take up space and create a tableau and create a place for people to project themselves. And there was a bunch of other stuff happening there too. A lot of, I don't want to be like, oh, it was very heady grad school stuff, but compared to, I think, the way I can speak and think now, it very much was heady grad school stuff. And I was really excited about it. And this was a portion of the tiles I made. This is over 1,500 tiles on the ground. I don't remember the exact number anymore. I had made well over 2,000 for the installation, but there were some disagreements surrounding what constituted a fire hazard, and how much space I could take up, and a variety of other things. And this is what we landed on. Was this layout. It was a fun project. It took 5 people to help me: my wife, my parents, a really close friend of mine from grad school. Thanks, Sarah. I don't think you're in this or anything, but you know, I like to shout people out when you can, right? But yeah, it took a full day to lay this stuff out, to put the grid down, to keep this thing organized, to kind of agonize over the rotations of this thing as it laid down, and kind of push and play, and then get everything else, the peripheral pieces installed around it. But it was a great project. It was really phenomenal. My thesis was accepted. I was no longer a candidate. I was apparently a Master of Fine Art, which was really exciting. I have a piece of paper that proves it. It's really, really cool. And I had this idea that I wanted to teach. I wanted to be a member of academia. I wanted to contribute to the academic discourse of the visual arts, except that I didn't. I was burned out. What academia was in my mind and what it was in reality were 2 vastly different things. I guess I saw how the sausage was made in a lot of sense. I think the pandemic brought out a lot of the worst in a lot of people who needed to be at their best at the higher levels of academics. And I was done, more or less. I needed a break. I needed a palate cleanser. I needed something. And what I needed was a residency. I needed a place to take a breath, take a break, take a step back, let go of some of this intellectual rigidity, and kind of get back some of that love of the material. And to make sure that I was going to do that, I did this. Oh, I smashed them up good, Donna Ray. So I did the old mold maker trick of canceling my molds. Yeah, so this is a traditional mold making practice. When a run is finished, you cancel the molds, and there's only one way to cancel plaster, and that's with a hammer. This was a really liberating experience. Also, incredibly anxiety inducing. I had been working with these molds for 2 years at this point. You know, those things were workhorses, and I had a lot of sentimental attachment to them, which is sort of silly. But, you know, to go forward, you can't give yourself a way back. So I broke all these molds out. We don't need to watch this the whole time, but it was just there for dramatic effect. If the sound was on, you can hear a lot of frightened voices in the surrounding studios, because I did do this in a communal studio. It was very loud. I didn't warn anyone beforehand because
It looks like 3 inches thick.
oh, it's not thin. Yeah, they were made to withstand a lot of really heavy chemical solvents, because I was working with a brick clay
Oh, yeah.
that did not lend itself to the flocculation. So I actually had to use an industrial solvent, not Darban, which I found out.
So the prototypes for each one of those molds was 3D printed?
Correct. Yeah, out of plastic. Yep. And then I started looking around, started thinking, and I had worked at a residency in Maine called Watershed, where I met Amanda Dobratz. And she had told me about Northern Clay Center. I had seen it on the little poster behind sinks and studios and stuff before, but had sort of like all things, it slips into the back of your mind. And I had kind of remembered a conversation, and then I started thinking about residencies, and I was like, oh, why not? It's a big city. My wife wanted to go to a big city. I wanted to get out of Missouri. And here we were on our way to Minneapolis. Yeah, it was exciting. I just packed everything up, hopped in the cars, and kind of did a couple trips to drop things off. I was really fortunate. Talked to Kyle, and I started as the artist services coordinator actually about a month before I started my residency, which was, it was a little strange, but also really interesting, because it was, I think, something I really needed, knowing that I was not interested in academia. Maybe art administration was the thing, finding a way to facilitate art along with making it. And I'm still doing it. So something stuck, I guess, which is great. Little glimpse ahead. I'm still here. But as I got here to Northern Clay Center, I was really excited to try some new stuff. This was really like a breath of fresh air. There was not these demands from all these different voices from these professors and galleries and things like that, just being constantly sort of drumming on you and harping about the importance of maintaining a specific aesthetic, developing this idea, exploring these philosophies deeper, understanding your research. Where is your writing? Where is this? Where is that? Who knows? So I was just going back through old sketchbooks at this point. I was playing with things that I had written down but never had the time to do in grad school between the loss of time and facilities and then sort of the frantic last minute push to make a show. So I was having a lot of fun. I was just making stuff. I was making these like weird extruded architectural things. If you haven't noticed, I have sort of a weird need to break things. Don't know exactly where it comes from, but it's there. I love to deconstruct the things I make. I feel like it adds so much, makes me feel better. I felt really unattached to a lot of things. I was just having a good time experimenting, wheel-thrown sculptural things that never got finished. There's a couple of them that never happened, just things that only made it as far as bone dry work on Instagram, and it was nice to be able to be there and to do those things, to not be so attached. But one thing I noticed was, hey, it's video. There it is. It's a little something, it's, I just was doing these things, very unattached, was enjoying myself a lot. The one thing I noticed was something I hadn't done in a long time kept kind of rising to the top. I hadn't made pots in any serious way, probably in 4 years at this point. Pretty dedicated to research and sculpture and installation, some video work, pretty much everything you would probably associate with grad school. But these things kept appearing. And it felt like a sign. It felt comfortable. I lacked some of those hand skills that I had, and it felt good to sort of re-engage with the material in a really honest way. And then this thing I'm sure you're all familiar with happened. Winter came. I'm from Florida. I've lived in Florida my whole life. I had some winters in Missouri, but there was no bidet Makaska in Missouri where I lived. There was nothing like that. There were no large bodies of water that froze. And this was a really, really jarring experience for me. I had never seen anything quite like this. And this became really informative. I became deeply fascinated to the point of obsession with walking around on frozen lakes. I had never experienced anything like it. It was truly mesmerizing. It was incredibly alien. I felt like a little kid again. I was sort of testing, each step at first, not believing that water can hold you up. I've been around water my whole life. People generally don't ski on water like that. Usually you need a boat and a guy screaming at you, to stay up so you don't drown. This is not how water works. It was really incredible to me. And, it became incredibly this childlike experience. And, I was jumping around on it and slipping and sliding, falling down, having a grand old time. And I mean, this is what I knew. This is water as I knew it. This is Jack's Beach. My whole life walking up and down coastlines, knowing water as a constant thing that was predictable. It had a tide. I knew when high tide was. I knew when low tide was. I knew it was red tide when my eyes were itchy. It became such a constant and such a regularity that I had forgotten about it. And to see it in this new way made it a novelty. And this awful picture sort of popped up one day. It wasn't good at all. And I should have chucked it immediately. It shouldn't have stayed, but it kept sitting and it defied disposal, which was really weird because I am not a sentimental person in the sense of like my work. If it's not good enough, it goes away. But this thing sat on my shelf for forever until it became a health hazard. It was growing mold. It was funky. It was gross. It smelled kind of weird. But I couldn't get rid of it. And that's really when this work started to emerge, the work that's in the show. The hand skills started feeling more natural again. Some of the old ideas were reemerging. The interest in compound objects and the way we can display. Clarice, it was really funny to see you also doing the pedestal things. You know, it's yeah. I was just finding my way back to these things, but I think I was so drawn to that ice and that frozen lake as well that it had to become a part of the aesthetic. And there were so many analogous moments between those early first steps on the frozen lake to this, where you had this ice, it was covered in these little cracks and these irregularities. It's a thing that shouldn't hold, but it always did. There was this deep darkness in the areas that you could see the water through the ice where the snow had shifted because of the wind. It was something that felt so solid. But as the season progressed, it became so fleeting watching that retreat again, to the point that those thin ice signs kept coming back up and there were fewer people sitting on buckets fishing and all this stuff. It just became incredible. I still don't entirely understand the work. It just felt right when it started happening. And there was this really, really interesting moment where these ripples formed and they were frozen. I think the visual vocabulary isn't as refined as I want it to be, but there was something about it that was really compelling and I wanted to keep exploring. And I just was enjoying this deep sort of connection with water in a new way, and sort of feeling some sentimentality mixed with this whole new idea from this new home of mine. And it all sort of started to, pardon the pun, but like solidify in this work. And it was starting to really come together. You know, I just love the way that the clay can capture sort of the fleeting character of ice and sort of defy, you know, it's a great archival material. It defies time in that way, clay, fire clay. It just became this thing that I was able to sort of try to put that enthusiasm into those first steps on ice. And it became really, really fun. And it kept me making this work. And this was like the first time in a long time I've been really, really excited to make pots again. And I found myself getting that kind of momentum that I remembered from grad school, this really frantic, enjoyable, artistic energy that I hadn't felt in a while, as I was sort of kind of doing that palate cleanser in the residency. And that was exciting and not something I'd felt in a while. So I just kept pushing that. And that's where this work is. I'm really excited for where the work is going to go. I'm an incredibly fickle maker. As soon as I think of another thing, I seem to move and shift. And for once, I feel like I'm in a place where I'm excited to kind of maintain and keep developing. I don't know where this work is going to go in the months to come, but I'm excited to see it. And I appreciate all of you listening to me talk about it. Before anything else, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you to NCC and let everyone know how grateful I was to have this opportunity. I'm incredibly thankful for all the friends I've made here, all the great connections. So thank you, NCC. Thanks, Kyle. Is there any other? Maya, I see you going. Thank you. NCC. And also thank you to my friends and family who may be listening. You guys are phenomenal. Thanks for everything.
Hi, friends. My name is Katie. I am I was the Fogelberg fellowship recipient from 22 to 23. We're just gonna jump right in. That's me and my silly little pots. So again, my name's Katie. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, neurodivergent, ceramic artist. I grew up in Albertville, Minnesota, about 45 minutes away from here. Went to school, like high school in Albertville, ended up going to UW Stout for art education and ceramics. I started just as an art education major, but I soon realized how much of an intense love I have for ceramics, and I just ended up double majoring. Some people ask me, like, why ceramics? Like, why is that the medium of choice? And I want to tell you a little bit about the first time that I ever threw on the wheel. I was 12, so it was just over 12 years ago. So I've been doing ceramics for about half my life, or exactly half my life. I took an exploration in clay class when I was in like 7th grade. Ended up trying the wheel and I just like immediately fell in love with it. I was completely infatuated by this process and this material. And I had always grown up being super artistic. I did a lot of like polymer clay things and lots of 3D art and super interested in that and drawing and painting, so on and so forth. But what really attracted me to ceramics is how much of an intimate medium it is, specifically throwing. I always felt some kind of separation between the drawings that I would make and the paintings. I always felt like there was some kind of degree of separation that I didn't really like. Like I wanted to be touching the materials. And so like when I would paint, I would often like use my fingers to blend and mix the paint, and I would do the same thing with drawing, but being able to have to be touching the clay the entire time. I use very few tools when I'm throwing, and when I'm making, I try to use as few tools as I can because I love actually touching the clay. Yeah, it's one of the most intimate mediums in my opinion, and like intimacy is something that shows up a lot in my art and my philosophy around making. This is named Gaston. I name most of my pieces because they have such distinct personalities to me. This is my favorite piece from my senior show. I graduated from college in December of 2021, had my senior show February of 22. And this was my favorite piece from it. And I thought I would share a shortened version of my artist statement with y'all so you can kind of understand the context of when I go forward. So my functional ceramic wares are a celebration of sensuality, femininity, classical aesthetics, and intimacy, all deeply influenced by my personal journey as a queer individual. My work draws inspiration from the female form, evident in the soft, voluptuous curves that grace each piece. Each sophisticated form is enhanced with decorative elements. These elements are designed to be not just visually appealing, but also comfortable to interact with. My artistic focus lies in the intimate moments of contact between the user and the object. The supple contours and textured slip trailing invite the viewer to explore with their fingertips, creating an interactive experience that unveils the intricate textures with each touch. Another reason that I'm so drawn to ceramics is the kind of ideas we have around finished ceramic ware. Like when you go to the American Pottery Festival, it is expected that you're touching all the pots. I have a really hard time going to museums because I like to touch all the work, and that is very not okay at a museum. And I find myself super drawn to like really like thick textured painting and just something that makes me want to run my fingers over the pieces. All right, inspiration. So first I'm going to talk about some artists that have inspired me in my creative journey. First of all, we're going to talk about Kate Morey. She's a professor at Stout and was a professor at Stout. She retired. Is a studio artist here. She introduced me to sprig molds, which is a very common element in my work. Kristen Kiefer. I fixated on her work for a while, especially in college. I did a lot of heavily textured stamp work that mimicked a lot of her work. I really enjoy all of the very intricate, detailed elements and the highly kind of feminine and sassy looking forms. Some other artists, Charlotte Greenair maybe. I am super attracted to just like the softness of these pieces of her work and how much it resembles like fabric, and the idea of making a material like fired ceramic ware that is so hard, making it look so soft and delicate is something that I'm really drawn to. Mike Stumbras, I'm obsessed with his handles like so much. I reference him a lot in my work specifically with my handles and all of the like decorative embellishments that go on his handles, and also just like the heavy texture that's all over his work. And then good old Julia Galloway, a classic. I'm really attracted to her forms and also her surface treatment. Like I really, as you will see, as we continue on this journey together, that I love runny glazes and how it emphasizes the curves of the form and kind of just like cascades down the forms during the firing. Another thing that is a big inspiration for me is Baroque and Rococo ornamentation. Think any kind of like vintage store or like really overly elaborate like chairs and picture frames and like dressers. I'm really attracted to the highly elaborate and decorative metal detailing, and I do reference that a lot in my work. Like, as I said, I'm not the biggest fan of going to museums because I can't touch the work, but I also find myself more interested in the framing a lot of the time, because of how textured and elaborate all of that is. All right, we're gonna talk about process. So for materials, I use a pink porcelain that I make in very small batches. It ends up to be like a warm, fleshy tone. I use colored slips, I use glaze and lusters. I throw all my forms, as I've said before, I'm really attached to wheel throwing. My thrown forms have these like soft, like really voluptuous curves. After things are thrown and trimmed, I apply sprigs. So I use plaster to make sprig molds out of a lot of old metalware. I went through this like fixation period where I was like going to thrift stores and like antique shops like every weekend and just like looking for new things to cast to really get those really nice, fun and funky textures. And my main sprig, which is like on the lid of this dude, is from like a dresser drawer handle that I just stumbled upon at a barn sale in like 2019, and I've just been really fixated on it for the past 5 years. After sprigs are added, I do slip trailing to add some really delicate details that mimic a lot of those like Baroque and Rococo designs. In terms of glaze, I do a clear coat on the entire surface because I want that pink to really show through, that soft, fleshy pink, but then I also use runny transparent glazes on certain moments in my pieces. I really love how it cascades down the form and really shows the curvature. Like if you look at the cup with like the purple pink drippies, I just love that moment of like flow over the piece to kind of draw your eye down the form. When I do glaze, I enjoy the unpredictability of the runny glazes especially. So what I do is I just like pile a bunch of glaze on specific areas, and then I put them in the kiln, hope for the best, and see how it flows, how it cascades, and kind of just let that moment in time really speak for itself. I also use a lot of lusters in my work. I use gold luster to reference antiquity, to add kind of a sense of like elegance and to also draw attention to a lot of the textures. All right, now we're gonna get into the good stuff. Residency work. We're gonna first start and talk about mugs. Mugs are my favorite thing to make because it really closely aligns with my philosophy around making and those intimate moments that you have with everyday objects. As you can see on the two mugs that are shown, the slip trailing details of the little sprig shape that I have, it's placed specifically so that when you take a drink out of it, your lower lip rests on the texture, creating kind of like an intimate moment with this piece, and in turn, like an intimate moment with me as the maker. I also pay a lot of attention to like handles. I add like sprigs and slips so that the parts of the pot that you're touching the most have the most attention, and they're really comfortable, and it's this sense of like closeness and comfort, honestly. Slip trailing, like I said, adds the texture in the moments, in the parts of the pot that are most interacted with. And as you can see on these mugs, I use that transparent runny glaze to emphasize the slip as well. And they're transparent so that they kind of cascade over the slip and are directed almost by the slip because of the surface tension. So it just flows right over, so you can still see the delicate detailing while also emphasizing the curvature. We got a cocktail cup and a goblet here. A lot of this residency for me was trying new forms and kind of learning how to make as a person who's not in school anymore. I came fresh from school, like a lot of people, or like Evelyn. I came like right from school, applied to a ton of residencies, and was just looking for an opportunity to take my making outside of an academic area. So a lot of this was about like experimentation and really honing in on my forms. It's been really exciting to create like variations on things that I have already made. Like I've never made like goblets or cocktail cups, but I'm like obsessed with like cups and mugs, so being able to kind of like elevate that. And the idea of like special occasion use, I think, is something that's also really evident in my work. Like when people see that goblet, for instance, they think special occasion form. I think I would drink, I don't know, milk out of that. I would drink juice out of that. I would use that every day. And I have pots in my house that I make that I use every day. One of the most like heartbreaking things that somebody has ever said to me was like, oh, this is too pretty to use. It's going on my mantle. And I'm like, no, that's a mug, or like that's a cup. It's meant to be used and interacted with. And by not doing that, it's kind of going against what I do as a maker and why I make. And like my entire like ideologies around like intimacy in my pieces. Right, here's a little set. I also wanted to kind of hone in my experience on or hone in my skill level when it comes to sets and relationships between pieces in a set. So a lot of this was about like refining forms, using glazes that I never had. I didn't start using like the transparent running glazes until this residency, because I was introduced by Kyle actually to like erbium, praseodymium, and neodymium, which are like rare earth mineral colorants that allow that really nice transparency, but also that pastel, delicate color. So a lot of the sets, this one's not in the show, but I do have a few sets in the exhibition, was kind of exploring the relationships between the two pieces and how they work together and interacted. And sticking out of it's a cream or sugar set, sticking out a little sugar dish is a little spoon. It was my first try at making spoons, which is something that I've wanted to do like literally forever. So I was very excited to do that. More experimentation was happening. One of my big goals was to use other sprigs, because I'm a very like fixation maker. I use that same sprig shape over and over again because I love it so much. So one of my biggest goals was to use all of the like some of the other sprigs that I had made. So this was one of the like new sprigs that I had tried. And this piece, his name's Napoleon, the short king we love. He was a real challenge because I had gotten so comfortable using my one sprig on my forms, and so having an entire new sprig on like to experiment and try out with, and it was a lot of trial and error. This piece took me like a week just in constructing, because I tried so many things and hated them and tried them again. And hated them. I ended up with this that I really, really do love. And this again references that like antiquity, those like gold metal frames. Direct reference. And I love that guy. Such a little dude. This next piece is my actual favorite piece from my residency. His name's Lucifer. Love him. This was a lot of experimentation as well. So this is a ewer, so it's like a pouring pot for wine. A lot of experimentation happened with the handle in this one, and there's a lot of direct reference to Mike Stumbris and how she was adding different textured elements onto his handles and how it adds to the overall look. And then this was around the spout of this guy was a different sprig that I hadn't used as well. So it gives it kind of like a garter type look, which I love, like a fancy little dude. I think that this is one of my most successful pieces from the past year and a half. It was a real struggle to figuring out like proportions and forms, and the handle in itself took me like 3 days. So I just like kept putting sprigs on and then like scraping them off and putting them back on and taking them off until I fine-tuned it enough where I loved it. That's my work. Where to find me? My website is listed, and so is my Instagram and my email. I teach at Egan Art House, and I work at Eden Prairie Art Center. I'm around in the surrounding community. Thank you for listening to me.